Forget the statues and the solemn holidays. History isn't just about triumphs. It has a junk drawer. A dusty, forgotten collection of baffling decisions, bizarre characters, and moments of pure, unfiltered, what were they thinking? Today, we're prying that drawer open and shining a harsh light on the contents. Prepare to be baffled. 1. Long before it was a modern-day cable news segment, the War on Christmas was a real legislative battle in 19th century Colorado. Lawmakers, in a stunning display of joyless bureaucracy, attempted to outright ban Christmas celebrations, declaring them wasteful distractions from more important things, presumably like being miserable. The public, however, was not about to let their Yuletide cheer be canceled by a committee. In a beautiful act of seasonal passive aggression, one of the leading politicians behind the bill received a special Christmas delivery from his angry neighbors. A large pile of coal dumped right on his doorstep. It seems some traditions are worth defending. 2. Imagine a sweltering summer night in 1930s Pennsylvania. Your house is an oven, and the only relief is the cool breeze on your front porch. Well, the town council had other ideas. They passed a law making it illegal to sleep on your own porch, citing that the practice was causing too many neighborhood disputes. What were these disputes? Aggressive snoring? Dream-induced mumbling? The law didn't specify. It just slapped a fine on the simple act of trying to escape the heat. It's a perfect example of using a legislative hammer to crack a nut, penalizing everyone just for trying to exist comfortably. 3. In 1917 Montana, the law wasn't just blind. It was also completely humorless. During a court session, a man was arrested on the spot for the simple act of smiling. His moment of unauthorized happiness was deemed contempt of court, and he was promptly hauled away. You have to wonder what prompted the smile. Did the judge's wig look particularly ridiculous? Did the lawyer make a profoundly stupid argument? We'll never know. All we know is that for a brief, terrifying moment in American history, having a pleasant facial expression in the wrong place was a punishable offense. Justice, apparently, required a mandatory frown. 4. Here's a perfect example of your tax dollars at work in the most gloriously weird way possible. To test the durability of Nike sneakers, the US government didn't use a boring machine. They used a cannon. They literally loaded brand new running shoes into military-grade artillery and fired them at high speeds to simulate the impact of a pedestrian being hit by a car. Imagine being the scientist who had to write that project proposal. Yes, sir, we need access to the Heavy Artillery Division for footwear science. It's a beautiful, unholy union of consumer product testing and explosive military hardware. 5. In 1883, the U.S. military constructed Fort Jefferson, a colossal coastal fortress in the Florida Keys that was a true strategic masterpiece. It was massive, imposing, and boasted a perfect, undefeated record against enemy fleets, mainly because it was so remote and useless that no enemy ever bothered to go near it. The soldiers stationed there fought off mosquitoes, heat stroke, and crushing boredom instead of invaders. It quickly became known as the loneliest fort in America, a massive, expensive monument to poor planning, slowly sinking into the sea in the middle of nowhere. 6. Long before the Wright brothers, a man in New York thought he had cracked the secret to personal flight. In 1902, he successfully patented a flying machine powered by a brilliant combination of compressed air and vigorous bicycle pedaling. While his invention never managed to defy gravity for even a second, his optimism remained sky-high. He confidently predicted to the press that his pedal-powered contraptions would fill the skies within a decade, making cars obsolete. We're still waiting. It's a humbling reminder that the road to innovation is paved with glorious, magnificent failures like this one. 7. In 1867, the United States made what is arguably the greatest real estate deal in history, purchasing Alaska from Russia for a measly $7.2 million, about 2 cents an acre. At the time, critics howled, calling the purchase Seward's folly, and mocking the government for buying a giant, useless, frozen wasteland. For years, it was the national punchline. Then came the gold rush. Then came the oil, Russia, which had been desperate to offload the territory, could only watch from across the strait in what must be the most cosmic case of buyer's remorse the world has ever seen. 8. Most towns build monuments to honor heroes, presidents, or soldiers. The town of Enterprise, Alabama, built one for its mortal enemy, a bug. In 1924, they unveiled a grand statue dedicated to the boll weevil, a pest that had completely destroyed their cotton-based economy. But this wasn't a curse, it was a thank you. The pest's devastation had been so total that it forced the farmers to diversify their crops, leading them to plant peanuts and save the town from ruin. It's a beautiful, uniquely American story of finding opportunity in disaster and building a monument to your own agricultural villain. 9. In the 19th century, soothing a crying baby was a top priority, and one New York inventor believed the answer lay in the Industrial Revolution. In 1855, he patented a self-rocking cradle powered by a small, but very real, steam engine. The contraption worked, chugging along and gently rocking the infant to sleep. However, parents were understandably reluctant to place their precious offspring next to a hissing, high-pressure machine that used the same technology as a locomotive. The invention never caught on, proving that while efficiency is great, most people prefer their nursery furniture not to be a potential explosion hazard. 10. The first automobile accident in U.S. history happened in Ohio in 1891, and it set a precedent for all crashes to come. Two of the only cars in the entire state managed to find each other and collide at a blistering speed of about 10 miles per hour. While no one was injured, something far more important was born that day: the post-accident argument. The drivers reportedly spent hours furiously debating whose fault it was, officially kicking off a grand American tradition that continues on every street and highway to this very day. Some things truly are timeless. 11. In the 1920s, the U.S. Army had a bold vision for the future of mobile infantry. Their solution? Mounting heavy machine guns onto standard-issue bicycles. The goal was to create swift, agile, and deadly troops who could pedal their way into battle. The concept failed spectacularly. The bicycles, not designed to handle the weight or recoil of a machine gun, often buckled. Aiming was nearly impossible, and the soldiers probably looked absolutely ridiculous trying to conduct combat operations while wobbling precariously. It was a short-lived experiment in weaponizing something you'd normally use for a trip to the park. 12. In 1967, a New York City artist decided to think big. His grand vision was to create the world's largest popsicle, a monumental frozen treat for all to see. He succeeded in creating it, but he severely underestimated his greatest enemy, the summer sun. The colossal orange popsicle began to melt almost immediately, faster than anyone could control. The ambitious art project quickly devolved into a public nuisance, flooding the streets with a sticky, sugary river of orange goo. It was a powerful lesson that sometimes, your greatest artistic ambitions can end as a major cleanup operation. 13. In 1945, a B-25 bomber, lost in thick fog, tried to pick a fight with the Empire State Building. The building won. While the crash was a horrific event, what followed was peak New York resilience. The building barely flinched, reopening for business just 2 days later. And in a truly unbelievable twist, an elevator operator, Betty Lou Oliver, survived a 75-story plunge in a damaged elevator car, setting a world record no one wants. It was less a structural failure and more a really, really bad day to be flying a plane over Manhattan. 14. In 1916, a rainmaker named Charles Hatfield convinced the city of San Diego, desperate from a drought, that he could fill their reservoir for a fee of $10,000. He built a strange tower and released a secret chemical mixture into the air. What followed were the worst floods in the city's history, destroying bridges and homes. When Hatfield came to collect his money, the city refused to pay, arguing that if he was responsible for the rain, he was also responsible for the damages. They called it an act of God, leaving the rainmaker with nothing but a legendary story. 15. A man in 1940s Florida took the concept of recycling to a whole new level. He built an entire house, from the foundation to the walls, almost entirely out of empty beer bottles held together with mortar. He proudly dubbed it the House of Brew. Surprisingly, the structure was remarkably sturdy, and even offered beautiful colored light when the sun shone through the glass. However, it came with an unintended side effect. The house became a local landmark and a pilgrimage site for thirsty tourists and beer enthusiasts, turning his home into a monument for a beverage he clearly loved. 16. In 1882, San Francisco introduced the world to a modern marvel of convenience and capitalism, the pay toilet. For the low price of a nickel, citizens could use a public restroom. But the famously resourceful and defiant people of San Francisco were not about to pay for something so fundamental. In response, many locals simply began carrying their own portable chamber pots with them when they went out on the town, creating the city's first unofficial and slightly disgusting bring your own potty movement. It was a short-lived but smelly protest against monetization. 17. During World War II, the US government, in a moment of desperate creativity, tried to recruit a new kind of spy, the seagull. The top-secret plan involved training seagulls to locate enemy submarines by patrolling the coastline. The military believed they could equip the birds with tiny cameras or homing devices. There was just one problem: the seagulls. The birds, being seagulls, had absolutely zero interest in national security and a profound, unshakable interest in finding discarded snacks and annoying beachgoers. The program was quickly scrapped. 18. When Rutherford B. Hayes became the first U.S. president to use a telephone in 1878, he was part of the world's most exclusive social network. The technology was so new that when someone reportedly asked for his phone number, his response was a masterclass in early adopter flexing. He explained that he didn't really have a number because there were only 2 telephones in the entire world, and his was one of them. It's a surreal thought in an age of spam calls and pocket supercomputers. A time when the leader of the free world could only call one other person. 19. In 1887, long before the internet gave us pointless national holidays, the US government decided the nation needed to rally around a pickle. They launched a campaign for the first National Pickle Day, a 24-hour celebration of all things brined. This wasn't just about enjoying a snack, it was a competition. Awards were given out for the biggest pickle lover in the nation, a title that presumably came with bragging rights and a serious case of heartburn. It was a bizarre, government-sanctioned attempt to find national unity in a jar of pickled cucumbers. You have to wonder what was happening in the country to make this seem like a good idea. 20. Before Henry Ford made the automobile king, a man in Kansas had his own vision for the future of transportation. In 1893, he built a motorized tricycle and, to prove its worth, drove it across the entire state. His journey was a success, earning him the epic nickname Kansas Cyclone. For a brief, shining moment, he was a pioneer, a hero of the open road on his 3-wheeled marvel. Unfortunately, his fame was as fleeting as a dust devil. The rise of the 4-wheeled automobile quickly overshadowed his invention, leaving the Kansas Cyclone as little more than a forgotten footnote in the history of things that almost were. 21. In the late 1800s, the U.S. Army looked at the vast, punishing deserts of the Southwest and decided they needed a new kind of soldier, the camel. They imported a whole corps of them to patrol the frontier. On paper, it was brilliant. The camels could carry heavy loads and endure the heat. In reality, it was a disaster. The animals had foul tempers, a deep hatred for their human handlers, and a tendency to spit with unnerving accuracy. The U.S. Army Camel Corps was eventually disbanded, but not before several of the disgruntled camels escaped, creating a feral population that roamed the American West for decades. 22. Years before the moon landing was even a dream, a group of American scientists in the 1920s were already setting their sights on Mars. They were utterly convinced that humans could live on the red planet. Their proposed solution to the whole no breathable air problem was surprisingly simple: a special space helmet. That was it. No complex life support systems, just a fancy helmet to make the Martian atmosphere breathable. Their research, predictably, didn't pan out. It's a wonderful example of that classic early 20th century optimism, where the only thing standing between humanity and interplanetary colonization was a good hat. 23. In 1903, the city of Denver held an election and chose a leader known for his loyalty, friendly demeanor, and love of belly rubs. His name was Patty, and he was a stray dog. Patty became the city's official mascot and was treated like absolute royalty. He received free meals from all the best local restaurants and even had his own reserved seat on the city's streetcars, which he used to travel around town on his own. It was the ultimate rags to riches story, proving that sometimes the most qualified candidate for public office is the one with 4 legs and a wagging tail. 24. Modern political campaigns spend millions on branding, focus groups, and messaging. In 1924, presidential candidate Calvin Coolidge decided to go a different route. His entire campaign slogan was, "Keep cool with Coolidge." That's it. It's a phrase that walks a fine line between minimalist genius and just plain lazy. Was it a brilliant piece of marketing or something his team came up with 5 minutes before the deadline? It doesn't matter, because it worked. He won the election in a landslide, proving that sometimes the American people don't want a complex platform. They just want a catchy, reassuring rhyme. 25. There are small-town bragging rights, and then there's what happened in Centerville, Indiana in 1922. The town decided to celebrate its crowning achievement with a massive parade. The guest of honor? A 600-pound wheel of cheese. This colossal dairy product was so enormous, it had to be hauled through the streets by a team of horses. Locals proudly proclaimed it the largest cheese in America, a claim that was probably impossible to verify but absolutely essential for town morale. It was a beautiful, cholesterol-heavy monument to the idea that if you can't be famous, you can at least have a really, really big cheese. 26. During Prohibition, bootleggers had to get creative to move their illegal booze. One of their most audacious methods involved turning the most innocent object imaginable into a tool of the trade: the baby carriage. They would smuggle bottles of whiskey and gin hidden under blankets, right where a baby should have been. It was a high-stakes gamble. Imagine a cop stopping to admire a cute baby, only to lift the blanket and find a dozen bottles of bootleg gin. It gives a whole new, much more literal meaning to the term spirited parenting. 27. In a moment of legislative insanity, the U.S. Congress passed a law in 1913 that effectively banned the immigration of ugly people. This wasn't a joke. It was part of a larger, deeply flawed bill aimed at limiting who could enter the country. The law was so vaguely worded and subjective that it was basically unenforceable. Who was the official judge of ugliness? Did immigration officers use a rating scale? The sheer absurdity and cruelty of the idea led to widespread confusion and outrage, and thankfully the provision was quickly repealed, marking a bizarre and embarrassing low point in lawmaking history. 28. In 1898, a dentist named Edwin Bramhall gave the world a gift of mechanical wonder. He invented the world's first vending machine for chewing gum. In an age before smartphones and constant entertainment, this simple device was a sensation. People would line up for blocks, not necessarily because they wanted the gum, but just to witness the miracle of putting a coin in a slot and watching a machine dispense a product. It was pure theater. The fact that a dentist invented a machine to easily distribute a sugary treat is an irony that was probably lost on the amazed crowds. 29. The Salem witch trials were a horrifying chapter in American history, but the town's paranoia didn't just stop with people. It reached its absolute peak of absurdity when a dog was officially accused of witchcraft. Yes, a dog was put on trial, charged with being a familiar of the devil. The court records don't specify what evidence was presented, perhaps a suspicious bark or an unauthorized tail wag, but the poor animal was found guilty and executed. It's a deeply disturbing and uniquely ridiculous footnote to a tragic event, proving that when mass hysteria takes hold, not even man's best friend is safe. 30. Long before your uncle shared an article about a flat Earth on Facebook, a New York City newspaper pulled off the original fake news stunt. In 1835, it published a series of articles known as the Great Moon Hoax, claiming that astronomers had discovered life on the moon. And this wasn't just any life. It was a civilization of winged, bat-like humanoids. The paper even included detailed illustrations of their temples and daily activities. The public didn't just believe it, they were obsessed. It was a brilliant, shameless con that proves one thing: gullibility has always been a part of the human condition. 31. Attempting to assassinate a U.S. president is a terrible idea. But attempting to assassinate Andrew Old Hickory Jackson in 1835 was a spectacular, life-threatening miscalculation. When a would-be assassin confronted him and both of his pistols misfired, most people would have been relieved. Jackson, however, was just furious. Instead of taking cover, the 67-year-old president charged at his attacker, chasing him down and beating him savagely with his cane until his aides could pull him away. The moral of the story is simple. If you come at the king, you best not miss, especially if the king is Andrew Jackson. 32. Decades before Surrealism became a major art movement, a group of eccentrics in 1866 New York City were already masters of the absurd. They formed the First American Surrealist Club, dedicated to challenging reality through pure, unadulterated weirdness. Their most famous event was a performance where members dressed up as farm animals and then mimed the actions of farm equipment. Imagine a grown man in a pig costume attempting to impersonate a thresher. The club was short-lived, but they were true pioneers of being strange for art's sake. 33. Here's a plan so audaciously insane it sounds like a rejected movie script. In 1866, a group of several hundred Irish-American Civil War veterans, known as the Fenians, launched a full-scale military invasion of Canada. Their goal wasn't to conquer Canada for themselves. Their grand multi-step plan was to capture Canada, hold it hostage, and then trade it back to Great Britain in exchange for Ireland's independence. It was a genuine armed conflict with real battles. They ultimately failed miserably, but you have to admire the sheer, breathtaking ambition of the idea. 34. In 1949, the farmers of a small town in Nebraska grew so disillusioned with human politicians that they decided to nominate a more trustworthy candidate for mayor, a goat named Gertie. This wasn't just a joke. It was a serious write-in campaign. While Gertie ultimately lost the election, she did receive hundreds of votes, proving that a significant portion of the electorate preferred a barnyard animal to the available human options. It's a heartwarming tale of grassroots democracy and a sobering reminder that political frustration has always led people to some very strange choices. 35. In the early 20th century, American doctors had a one-size-fits-all solution for nearly every medical complaint. Shake it. Large, vibrating beds and chairs called health vibrators were marketed as miracle cures for everything from headaches and indigestion to more vaguely defined ailments like female hysteria. These contraptions were installed in hospitals and sold for home use, with advertisements promising that a good jiggle could restore vitality and health. It was a bizarre era of medicine where the primary treatment for any problem was to be violently rattled until you felt better. 36. The U.S. Postal Service has always pursued innovation, but in 1959, they took it to a whole new, slightly terrifying level. They attempted to deliver mail by rocket. In a joint project with the Navy, a guided missile was loaded with 3,000 letters and successfully launched from a submarine off the Florida coast, hitting its target perfectly. The Postmaster General triumphantly declared it the future of mail. While the test was a success, the idea was quickly scrapped. Someone probably realized that using weapons of war for daily mail delivery was perhaps a tad unpredictable, expensive, and generally a very bad idea. 37. The 19th century was a famously prudish time, but the U.S. government's moral crusade reached a new level of absurdity in 1894. They passed a law outlawing the mailing of any obscene materials. This included the usual suspects, but the law also specifically banned illustrations of dancing skeletons. Apparently, the sight of a skeleton enjoying a lively jig was considered too scandalous and morally corrupting for the American public to view. It's a strange thought. An era where a drawing of bones busting a move was considered a threat to the nation's decency. 38. Today, bicycles are a common sight, but in 1892 Kansas, they were seen as a menace to society. The city of Topeka briefly banned bicycles from its streets, claiming they were a public nuisance that startled horses and clogged up the roads. The local cyclists, however, were not about to give up their newfound freedom. They organized, protested, and fought back against the ban in a conflict that the local papers dramatically dubbed the Great Bicycle Rebellion. The cyclists eventually won, but for a short time, riding a bike was an act of civil disobedience. 39. The year is 1911. You buy a can of corned beef, a staple of the American pantry. You open it, only to discover it's not beef. A meatpacking company in Omaha made a slight labeling error, accidentally shipping out thousands of cans of horse meat under the guise of corned beef. The resulting national scandal was immense, sparking public outrage and leading directly to stricter food labeling laws. You have to imagine the trust issues that followed. For years, people were probably poking their dinner with a fork, suspiciously asking, "Are you sure this is beef?" 40. In 1915, San Francisco's Panama Pacific International Exposition was a showcase of human achievement. But amidst the technological marvels and cultural exhibits was a competition of a different breed. The fair hosted a full-blown beauty pageant for cows. With serious judges and adoring crowds, bovines competed for the coveted title. A lovely creature was ultimately crowned Miss Holstein 1915, presumably for her elegant posture, lustrous coat, and overall fabulousness. It was a glorious moment in agricultural pageantry, proving that in America, anyone or anything can be a beauty queen. 41. In 1921, a man in Nevada had a revolutionary idea that was decades ahead of its time. He decided to sell his house, but he wasn't selling the land, just the house itself, which he had conveniently mounted on wheels. He proudly marketed it as the world's first mobile home, a dwelling you could take with you wherever you went. While the concept didn't immediately catch on in an era of dirt roads and primitive engines, you have to give him credit. He was a true visionary who perfectly predicted a future where your home's address was wherever I decide to park it today. 42. Long before TikTok challenges had people doing questionable things for internet fame, college students in the 1920s had their own bizarre craze: goldfish swallowing. This was exactly what it sounds like. Students would gather in crowds to see who could swallow the most live goldfish in a single sitting. It was a strange, short-lived fad that swept campuses across the nation, becoming a weird rite of passage for a generation. It's a comforting thought in a way that young people making terrible, inexplicable decisions for bragging rights is not a new phenomenon. 43. The U.S. Treasury once printed a bill with a face value of $100,000. Featuring the portrait of Woodrow Wilson, these bills weren't for public circulation. They were used exclusively for high-level fund transfers between Federal Reserve banks. Still, just imagine the sheer power of holding one. You could walk into a grocery store, buy a cart full of food, and casually tell the cashier to keep the change. You'd be leaving a tip large enough to buy the entire store, and probably the whole city block it sits on. 44. In the early days of the automobile, a con artist targeted rural farmers with a miracle invention: a simple black box that could supposedly recharge an electric car's battery from any wall socket, a technology that didn't exist. He sold hundreds of them. The box, however, contained nothing but a simple clockwork mechanism that made a faint ticking sound to mimic the charging process. By the time the farmers realized their cars were still dead and they'd been scammed, the inventor had vanished, leaving behind a trail of useless boxes and broken dreams of cheap energy. 45. Sometimes the line between military genius and complete insanity is dangerously thin. During World War II, the US developed the bat bomb. The plan was as simple as it was diabolical. Strap tiny incendiary devices to thousands of live bats, release them over Japanese cities, and wait for the bats to roost in the wooden buildings before igniting 1,000 fires simultaneously. It was a brilliant, terrifying concept. There was just one tiny problem. During a live test, some of the armed bats got loose and decided to roost in the nearest available structures, the hangars and barracks of a US military base, which they promptly set on fire. The project was canceled. 46. Prohibition was meant to dry up America, but resourceful pharmacists found a brilliant loophole. They were legally permitted to prescribe medicinal whiskey for a wide range of ailments. The pharmacy chain Walgreens saw this not as a public service, but as a golden business opportunity. Leaning heavily into the medicinal booze market, the company exploded in growth, expanding from just 20 stores to nearly 500 during the 13 years of prohibition. It's a masterclass in capitalism. When the government makes something illegal, just rebrand it as medicine and watch the profits roll in. 47. In 1859, New York City officials concerned about air pollution tried to ban the use of coal-burning stoves. The citizens of New York responded with a level of chaotic defiance that would make modern protesters proud. Angry residents took to the streets in what became known as the Stove Riot, not just protesting, but physically dumping their heavy cast-iron stoves into the middle of the roads. They created massive, impassable barricades of kitchen appliances, causing the ultimate traffic nightmare and sending a very clear, very heavy message to the city. Don't mess with our heat. 48. If you've ever been frustrated by a politician who just won't stop talking, you have one man to thank for the solution. In 1876, Congressman Benjamin Butler was so notoriously long-winded and his speeches were so insufferably endless that his colleagues in Congress reached a breaking point. They were so tired of listening to him that they passed a new rule specifically to shut him up, officially limiting the amount of time any member could speak. That's right. The time limits that govern modern political debate exist because one guy was just that annoying. 49. Kansas is known for wheat fields, tornadoes, and being about as far from an ocean as you can get. So, in 1938, a farmer was understandably confused when he discovered massive, fossilized shark teeth in his field. Scientists later confirmed they belonged to a Cretalomna, a giant prehistoric shark that swam in the shallow sea that covered the American Midwest millions of years ago. It's a mind-bending geological fact that turns everything you know on its head. Imagine trying to explain that to your neighbors over the fence. Yeah, Bill, watch where you're plowing. This used to be shark country. And that's the proof. The past wasn't just different. It was operating on a completely different level of sanity. But let's be honest, are we any better? I challenge you. Get in the comments and give me one modern law, trend, or invention that is just as monumentally stupid as anything we've just covered. The most ridiculous, face-palm-worthy example wins my eternal respect. If you enjoy seeing history's most embarrassing moments get the spotlight they deserve, you know what to do. Subscribe and ring the bell. A like helps prove that making fun of the past is a viable career choice.